The morning they came for my cabin, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew something they didn't. I stood on the gravel driveway, coffee mug in hand, as 4 trucks from the HOA rolled up like they were raiding a cartel hideout. One guy hopped out wearing mirrored sunglasses and carrying a clipboard, barking orders like he owned the place. Another started taking pictures. A third one? He brought a bulldozer. My cabin wasn't even that big, just a quiet, hand-built retreat on the edge of county land. But these guys acted like it was some illegal fortress. They didn't know that the man they were about to screw over was the very person who could shut their entire operation down. You ever watch someone dig their own grave without realizing it? That's exactly what I witnessed that day. They waved their papers around, calling it an unauthorized structure, claiming it violated HOA aesthetics. The funny part, my property wasn't even under their HOA jurisdiction. But try telling that to a pack of power-hungry board members who think a logo on a clipboard makes them God. I tried to stay calm. I asked for their permits, their orders, the specific regulation they believed I'd broken. The guy in the sunglasses smirked and said, "Sir, this is HOA business. Step aside." I wanted to tell him that the county had stricter laws about demolitions, and that the person who enforces them was standing right in front of him. But no, not yet. I wanted to see just how deep this arrogance went. See, I'd moved out here 5 years ago after retiring from the city inspection department. I'd spent 3 decades walking into half-built homes, shady construction sites, and multi-million-dollar projects, all to make sure people followed the rules. And now I just wanted peace. I bought this small lot, well outside the HOA boundary, built my own cabin with my own hands. The place meant something. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was the first thing I built purely for myself. No permits, no supervisors, no deadlines breathing down my neck. Ironically, I still followed every single safety code and regulation to the letter. Old habits die hard. So when I saw those HOA trucks crossing onto my land, my first thought was, they can't be this stupid. My second thought was, let's see how far they go. They didn't bother serving notice. They didn't call. They didn't even send a letter. They just rolled in with a demolition crew like a bunch of wannabe sheriffs. I stood back as the excavator clawed into the front porch, splintering the cedar beams I'd spent weeks sanding. Every slam of that bucket was a punch in my chest. I could have stopped them right there, flashed my badge, called the county, shut the whole thing down, but I didn't. I wanted them to hang themselves with their own rope. The lead guy kept yelling about community standards. He even pointed at my non-compliant paint color. I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. The paint? It was approved by the county environmental board. The wood? From a local mill that met all zoning codes. But these idiots didn't even check the parcel number. My property sat on county land. No HOA authority. No jurisdiction. Nothing. They were trespassing, vandalizing, and destroying private property under the false impression that I was just another resident afraid of their fines. By the time they were done, my cabin was a pile of rubble, the porch gone, the windows shattered, the roof in pieces. I watched every minute, standing still. Not one of them stopped to ask why I wasn't panicking. Maybe they thought I was too old to fight back. Maybe they just didn't care. But I was thinking about how every single one of their actions was being recorded on the small security cameras I'd installed for wildlife. Those cameras fed directly into a cloud account, time-stamped and backed up. The moment that bulldozer touched my land, my case was airtight. That night, I sat at the edge of the ruins with a flashlight, taking notes. The cold wind cut through the trees, carrying the sound of crickets. I wasn't angry yet, just focused. I'd seen worse in my career. Developers bribing inspectors, contractors cutting corners, city officials faking compliance reports. But this was personal. They hadn't just demolished a structure. They demolished the one piece of peace I'd built after a lifetime of enforcing laws for other people. And now, for once, I was going to enforce them for myself. The next morning, I visited the county office like nothing had happened. I walked in, greeted the receptionist, and filed an official report of unlawful demolition and trespassing. When she asked for documentation, I smiled and handed over the photos, footage, and property maps. "You'll want to mark this one urgent," I said. She looked at my name. Her eyes flicked up in recognition, and she almost laughed. "Wait, you're that inspector?" I nodded. She didn't need any more explanation. The paperwork was fast-tracked within the hour. Meanwhile, the HOA board was busy congratulating themselves. They even posted on their website about enforcing community regulations and maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. The arrogance was staggering. They had no idea that their post alone was enough to prove intent and public acknowledgement. I gave it a few days, let them sit comfortably in their illusion of victory, and then I called for a full county audit of their operations. Every permit, every project, every budget line. I knew exactly where to look for the skeletons. They always leave them in the same closet. When the county inspectors rolled into their office, I went along quietly, wearing my old badge. The board president's face turned pale the moment he saw me. I could almost read his thoughts. "What's he doing here?" I smiled politely and said, "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm here to observe today's inspection." You could hear the silence drop like a bomb. They stumbled through excuses, stuttering about a misunderstanding, a clerical error, confusion about property lines. I let them talk. I'd heard every version of that story before, from every shady builder who ever got caught. But before the county even released its findings, something unexpected happened. One of the junior HOA members, a young guy named Drew, reached out to me privately. He said he didn't agree with what the board had done and wanted to help. At first, I didn't trust him, thought maybe he was fishing for information. But when he sent me internal emails showing they'd ignored multiple warnings about jurisdiction boundaries, I realized he was genuine. They'd been told 3 times that my land was outside HOA limits. 3 times. And they'd still gone ahead with demolition. That wasn't incompetence anymore. That was intent. I asked Drew why he was helping me. He said, "Because they ruined my uncle's place last year. He didn't fight back. You should." That was all the confirmation I needed. I told him, "Son, they picked the wrong man this time." In the following week, I compiled everything: drone footage, timestamps, witness statements, internal emails, jurisdiction maps. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a masterclass in arrogance. They'd weaponized authority they didn't have, and now they were going to pay for it. But the best part, I wasn't even going to sue them myself. I'd let the county do it for me. I just had to give them the right push. When the official audit report landed, it hit harder than I expected. It didn't just outline the illegal demolition. It exposed a decade's worth of violations. Unauthorized construction fines, unreported dues, misallocated maintenance funds, even misuse of residents' money. The HOA had been operating like a mini dictatorship, and no one had ever questioned it until now. That same evening, the county attorney called me. "We're preparing a full investigation," she said. "Would you be willing to testify?" I didn't even hesitate. "I built that cabin with my own hands," I said. "I'll testify for every nail they destroyed." Still, I wanted to see their reaction when the news broke. So I took a little drive through the neighborhood one last time. The same people who used to glare at me from their manicured lawns now avoided eye contact. A few whispered as I passed by. Maybe they'd heard already. Maybe they sensed the storm that was coming. But the board members, they still thought they could talk their way out. They hadn't learned yet who I was, what authority I actually carried, or how deep this was about to go. Because here's the truth. They thought they'd taken down a cabin. What they didn't know was that they just triggered a full-scale investigation led by the man whose signature could revoke their entire HOA's operational license. And I was ready to make sure that's exactly what would happen next. The next morning, the news hit faster than even I expected. The county had issued a public notice. Investigation into homeowners association misconduct underway. Local reporters were already sniffing around, and a drone photo of my demolished cabin made the front page of the county paper. I didn't have to say a word. The image said everything. A heap of shattered wood, twisted metal, and my name underneath the headline. Retired county inspector's property illegally demolished by HOA. The phone started ringing before breakfast. Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years were calling just to say, "You're really doing this, huh?" Oh, I was doing it, and I wasn't even close to done. The HOA board scrambled into panic mode. Their president, Richard, issued a statement claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that their team had acted in good faith based on the information available. But the county had already reviewed the parcel map. My lot was marked clearly outside their jurisdiction, highlighted in bold red ink. Their excuses collapsed like the front wall of my cabin. By noon, I got a call from the county director of zoning and land enforcement, a man named George, who used to be my trainee 20 years ago. I heard what happened, he said, trying not to laugh. You really let them dig their own grave, didn't you? Just watching the process unfold, I said. He chuckled. Well, it's unfolding fast. The board's being summoned for a hearing. You'll want to be there. That was exactly what I wanted. Because while they were scrambling to save face, I was building something else, a record so airtight that even their lawyers couldn't wiggle through it. I wanted them to know what it felt like to be powerless, to watch something you built crumble under someone else's arrogance. 3 days later, I walked into the county courthouse. They didn't recognize me at first. I was dressed plain, in jeans and an old jacket. But when the bailiff called my name, heads turned. Richard froze mid-sentence. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something like, "Wait, he's the inspector." The judge looked over her glasses and said, "M.R. Hartley, would you please state your credentials for the record?" I nodded. John Hartley, 32 years as a certified county inspector. Served as deputy head of zoning enforcement for 12 of those years. Retired 3 years ago. The silence that followed was beautiful. You could hear a pin drop. Even the stenographer looked up for a moment. Richard tried to speak first. All confidence and fake politeness. "M.R. Hartley, we were under the impression that your property fell within the jurisdictional expansion approved last spring." I cut him off gently. There was no expansion, Richard. The proposal was denied on April 14th. I signed the rejection myself before retirement. The lawyer's pen froze midair. The judge raised an eyebrow. "M.R. Hartley, you're saying the HOA acted on a jurisdiction they did not legally possess?" "That's correct, Your Honor. They trespassed, executed an unauthorized demolition, and falsified justification through a non-existent ordinance." The judge looked unimpressed with the HOA's counsel. "That's quite serious." I didn't even need to press harder. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Every photograph, every timestamp, every GPS coordinate lined up perfectly. I'd spent my life documenting violations. This was second nature. As I spoke, I saw their faces shift, the smug confidence melting into quiet panic. And the best part? I wasn't angry. I was calm, collected. Every word I said was measured, factual, irrefutable. There's a certain power in letting people realize how deeply they've underestimated you. When the hearing adjourned, I walked out without looking back. But the reporters waiting outside, they didn't miss me. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. One of them asked, "M.R. Hartley, are you planning to press charges?" I smiled slightly. Let's just say I'm letting the law do what it's supposed to do. Behind me, I heard Richard shouting at his lawyer. Something about damage control and community image. But there's no damage control when your entire board just got caught breaking multiple state laws on record. By evening, the HOA's social media pages were flooded with comments. Residents were furious, not because they cared about me, but because now they realized how deep the corruption went. People were demanding refunds, audits, resignations, the perfect chaos. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. Revenge wasn't the point. I wanted accountability. I wanted them to feel the weight of the laws they'd ignored. That night, I drove back to what was left of my cabin. The moonlight stretched across the empty foundation. It was quiet again, almost peaceful. I could smell pine, wet soil, and the faint memory of cedar from the demolished beams. I sat on an old folding chair and let the silence settle. For the first time, I felt something other than anger. Clarity. They thought they'd erased my space, my peace. But what they really did was give me a purpose again. I'd spent years enforcing rules to protect others. Now, I was enforcing them for myself. A week later, George called again. "The county just concluded its internal review," he said. "You might want to sit down." I leaned back, phone to my ear. "How bad is it?" "For them? Catastrophic. Turns out they've been filing false maintenance expenses for years. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. And get this, they approved demolitions for properties they never had authority over. You weren't even the first." I clenched my jaw. "How many?" "4, at least. Maybe 5. That's when I stopped thinking of it as a personal vendetta. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about everyone they'd bullied. Every homeowner who'd been too afraid or too broke to fight back. So I decided to make it public. I gathered all my evidence, the video, the photos, the audit results, and sent it to the local news under one simple subject line. What happens when an HOA thinks it's above the law? The story exploded. Within 48 hours, it was all over state media. Interview requests poured in. People started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Someone even started a petition demanding the dissolution of that entire board. For the first time, the bullies were the ones cornered. Then came the phone call that made me grin wider than I had in years. It was Richard himself. His voice shook as he tried to sound calm. "John, we didn't realize who you were. If we'd known, this would have never." "That's the problem, Richard," I interrupted. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them fairly." He went quiet. I let the silence sit until he finally said, "What do you want from us?" I thought for a moment. "You'll find out soon." The next week, the county officially suspended their charter pending a full legal review. Their accounts were frozen. Their demolitions halted. Every action they took was now subject to approval by the county board. And when the fines rolled in, oh, they rolled hard. Unauthorized demolition, unlawful trespassing, property damage, abuse of authority, falsification of jurisdiction, all stacked neatly like dominoes. Each violation came with a penalty. Added together, the total exceeded $600,000, enough to bankrupt their operation completely. But I wasn't done. I wanted them to rebuild what they destroyed, down to the last nail. So I filed a civil suit for restoration. My demand was simple. The HOA would fund the reconstruction of my cabin, exactly as it stood before demolition, using licensed contractors under county supervision. Their lawyer called it vindictive. The judge called it justice. When the verdict came through, the court ordered full restitution, plus damages. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Months later, I stood watching as a new crew arrived, this time with actual permits, county oversight, and no mirrored sunglasses. The same ground where arrogance had bulldozed my peace was now being rebuilt under the same law they'd once mocked. Drew, the young guy who'd helped me, stopped by during reconstruction. He looked around and said, "Feels different this time, doesn't it?" I smiled. "Yeah, feels right." He hesitated before adding, "They're dissolving the HOA next month. County's taking over management." "Good," I said quietly. "Maybe now people will remember what community actually means." By the time the cabin was finished, the sun was setting over the ridge. The fresh cedar glowed gold in the light, almost exactly how it had looked before they tore it apart. I ran my hand along the new railing. Perfect work. Maybe even better than the original. I didn't need a celebration, just peace. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that first morning, how they strutted onto my land thinking they were untouchable. And I smile, because they never realized the truth until it was too late. They hadn't just demolished a cabin. They demolished their own authority. And I made sure every nail, every beam, every inch of that cabin stood as a reminder of what happens when power forgets its place. The cabin stood like a symbol of quiet defiance, every plank and window frame whispering a story of justice reclaimed. But what came after, what unfolded in the weeks that followed, was bigger than I'd imagined. The HOA's downfall didn't just end with court papers and fines. It sparked something in the people who'd been silent for years. Within days of the verdict, letters started showing up in my mailbox. Handwritten notes from residents, people I'd never met, telling me about their own battles. Fences they'd been forced to paint a certain color. Trees they weren't allowed to plant. Flags they couldn't hang. Every story carried the same undertone. Exhaustion. People were tired of being ruled by fear. Tired of pretending to agree with a handful of powered, drunk board members who thought community meant control. One note stood out. It was from a widow named Mrs. Palmer, who lived 2 streets over. She wrote, "They fined me $300 for having a ramp built for my husband before he passed. Said it didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. I paid it because I didn't know I could say no. Thank you for showing us that we can." That one hit me hard. I'd spent decades enforcing compliance, making sure people followed the code. But this wasn't compliance. It was coercion disguised as order. So when the county announced a public forum to discuss the future of the now defunct HOA, I showed up, not as the inspector, not as the victim, but as a neighbor. The town hall was packed. You could feel the tension like static in the air. Some people were angry, others just confused. The moderator, a calm woman from the county's legal department, stepped up to the mic. We're here to determine the next steps in transferring community management away from the dissolved HOA, she said. Residents will have the opportunity to voice their concerns and suggestions. And boy, did they. One by one, people stood up and unloaded years of frustration. A man talked about how they'd fine him for parking his work truck in his own driveway. A young mother said they'd threatened to sue her for letting her kids chalk the sidewalk. Every story added another crack to the illusion of authority the HOA had built. When it was my turn, I didn't go up to the microphone right away. I waited, listened, watched the faces of people realizing, maybe for the first time, that they weren't alone. Then I walked up. The room went quiet. I spent 30 years of my life making sure people built safely, legally, and responsibly. I began. I've seen good systems protect communities, and I've seen bad ones destroy them from within. What happened here wasn't just an abuse of authority. It was a betrayal of trust. And trust is the foundation of every neighborhood worth living in. A few heads nodded. Some looked down, maybe remembering their own moments of silence. I'm not here to gloat, I continued. I just want to remind everyone, rules mean nothing if they don't serve the people they're meant to protect. You can rebuild structures. You can't rebuild integrity once it's gone. That's why you have to stay involved, stay aware, and never let a handful of signatures decide what your life should look like. When I stepped down, there was a long pause, and then applause. Real, unforced, human applause. The county later announced a new committee, open, transparent, volunteer-based, to manage common areas and coordinate neighborhood issues. No secret meetings, no self-appointed kings. It wasn't perfect, but it was something real. Richard and his board, they vanished from sight. Rumor was, a few of them moved out of state. One tried to start another HOA under a different name in the next county, but word spread fast, and nobody signed up. Once your name becomes synonymous with corruption, there's no coming back. Months passed, and I went back to my routine. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, same way I'd rebuilt the cabin. Every weekend I'd fix a small detail, hang a picture, carve a shelf, sand a window frame. Sometimes, Drew would drop by to help. He'd quit the HOA entirely and started working with the county inspection office instead. Said he wanted to do it right this time. One afternoon, as we were fixing the back porch railing, he asked, "Do you ever regret not stepping in sooner? Like stopping them before they demolished it?" I thought about that for a long moment. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped against a trunk. "No," I said finally. "If I had stopped them that day, they'd still think they could get away with it. Sometimes you have to let the storm hit so people can see what needs rebuilding." He nodded, like that made sense to him. Maybe it did. The seasons shifted. Winter came with its quiet snowfall, wrapping everything in a soft white stillness. For the first time in years, I felt peace. The cabin stood warm and solid, smoke curling from the chimney. I'd wake early, make coffee, step out onto the porch, and watch the light crawl over the hills. The land was calm again, but the story didn't quite end there. About 6 months after the rebuild, I got another letter, this time from the state attorney's office. The investigation into the HOA had uncovered broader fraud. Multiple HOAs across neighboring counties were linked to the same management company that had enabled this one. False filings, illegal demolitions, embezzlement, the works. And apparently, my case had been the domino that set it all off. The letter thanked me for my cooperation and included a single sentence that made me smile. "Your actions have helped protect over 400 homeowners from further abuse." 400. It was strange to think that something so small, a cabin, a few acres of land, had rippled that far. But maybe that's how it always works. Big changes never start in boardrooms. They start when ordinary people decide they've had enough. One evening, I was sitting by the fireplace when Mrs. Palmer knocked on the door. She was holding a pie and smiling. "Just thought you might like something homemade," she said. We sat, ate, talked about the neighborhood, about how quiet it had become, about how people had started helping each other again, sharing tools, planting gardens, waving to each other instead of filing complaints. I asked her how she felt about it all now. She smiled softly. "Feels like home again." And that, more than the lawsuits, more than the headlines, was the real victory. Weeks later, the county invited me to speak at a community event. Not about the case, but about rebuilding trust in neighborhoods. I stood on a small stage under an open sky, the same hills in the distance, and told them the truth I'd learned through all of it. Laws can build order, I said, but only people can build community. Don't ever hand that power over to anyone who forgets that difference. The crowd clapped. Some stood. But as I looked out at all those faces, neighbors, families, strangers, I realized something. I hadn't just rebuilt my cabin. I'd rebuilt something far more important. The idea that one person standing up can still make a difference. Later that night, back on the porch, I turned off the lights and let the stars do their work. The woods hummed with quiet life, crickets, wind, the occasional owl. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, the air didn't taste like tension. It tasted like peace. Maybe that's what justice really is. Not about punishing the guilty, but restoring balance, making things whole again. I picked up a small wooden plaque I'd carved myself and nailed it above the cabin door. It read, "This cabin was demolished by arrogance, rebuilt by truth." Every time I walked in or out, I'd see it. A reminder that silence is the ally of power, and that speaking up, even when you stand alone, can shake foundations stronger than concrete. The cabin still stands there today, steady as ever. The grass has grown back, the paint's a little faded, and sometimes hikers stop by, curious about the story. I never tell them everything, just enough to make them think. And when they ask, "So you were really the county inspector?" I smile, sip my coffee, and say, "I still am, just not on the payroll." Because some jobs never end. You don't need a badge to defend what's right. You just need to stand your ground, no matter who tries to bulldoze it.